A single mom walked out of the interview room in silence. She had just been rejected for a front desk position at the same luxury nightclub where she had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets for 3 years, not because she lacked ability, but because she did not fit the image they wanted. They saw a janitor. She saw 6 years of restaurant management experience they refused to acknowledge. She chose to leave with her dignity intact rather than beg for another chance. But as she prepared to exit the building, something unexpected happened. The glass doors from the VIP corridor swung open, and every person in the lobby froze. The most ruthless Mafia boss in New York stepped into the light, his cold eyes scanning the room until they found her. Then he called her name in front of everyone. Why would a man who never gave second chances stop for a woman the world had already dismissed? If this story moves you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. Now, let us find out what happened when Emma Cole met Nikolai Petrov. 3 years ago, Emma Cole was a completely different woman. She was the evening shift manager at an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, a place where a single dinner could cost as much as an ordinary person's monthly rent. She supervised a team of 15 employees, handled the most demanding guests without ever losing her composure, and was trusted without question by the owner. Her life wasn't wealthy, but it was steady. She had a small apartment in Brooklyn, a husband named Jason who worked in construction, and a 3-year-old daughter named Lily with eyes as clear as a summer sky. Emma once believed that was everything she needed. Then everything collapsed like falling dominoes. Lily began to grow tired easily, her lips turning blue whenever she ran or played, gasping for breath after climbing only a few steps. Dr. Helen Park studied the test results, then looked at Emma with an expression she would never forget. Congenital heart disease, a ventricular septal defect. The child would need lifelong monitoring and surgery when she was old enough. The cost of treatment was a number Emma didn't dare say out loud. She believed Jason would face it with her. She was wrong. Jason started coming home late, then not coming home at all, then disappearing for entire weeks with excuses that grew harder to believe. She found debt collection messages on his phone, numbers with so many zeros she had to count them twice. Gambling. He'd been gambling for 2 years without her knowing. One morning, Emma woke up to find Jason's closet empty. No explanation, no message, not a single call. He left as if she and Lily had never existed, abandoning $70,000 in debt to collectors who knocked on her door in the middle of the night. Emma had to miss work more and more often to take Lily to medical appointments, to deal with threatening calls, to keep her life from completely falling apart. The restaurant let her go under the excuse of staff reductions, but she knew the truth. Then her mother, Mia, a 60-year-old woman who still cleaned hotel rooms to help her daughter, suffered a stroke during her shift. She survived, but she was paralyzed on one side, unable to speak clearly, unable to care for herself. 3 generations of women were now crammed into a 1-bedroom apartment in the most run-down corner of Brooklyn. A 6-year-old child with a fragile heart, an elderly woman who couldn't move half her body, and Emma, 27 years old, unemployed, without a husband, without anyone to lean on. Medical bills piled on top of medical bills. Rent was late by 1 month, then 2. The refrigerator grew emptier by the day. Emma applied for jobs everywhere, but no one wanted to hire a single mother who needed flexible hours to care for a sick child and an aging parent, until she found a night janitor position at the Obsidian, the most luxurious nightclub in New York, owned by the Petrov Holdings Group. The shift ran from 10 at night to 6 in the morning. The pay wasn't high, but it was enough to keep her from being thrown out onto the street. And most importantly, she could be home during the day to care for Lily and her mother. Emma didn't know that when she walked through the doors of the Obsidian for the first time, she was stepping into the territory of the most powerful underground empire in the city. She only knew she needed this job to survive. For 3 years, she did this job. 3 years of pushing a mop cart through silent corridors at 2 in the morning while the entire city slept. The Obsidian at night was a completely different world from the daytime. When the music stopped and the last guest left, the club became as still as an abandoned castle, with nothing but the low hum of the ventilation system and the sound of Emma's cartwheels rolling across polished marble. Her work began in the main hall, where crystal chandeliers worth hundreds of thousands of dollars hung above her head. She wiped each tile, polished every glass tabletop, gathered forgotten cocktail glasses from beneath velvet sofas. Then she moved to the VIP area on the 2nd floor, where private rooms had soundproof doors and no cameras. She cleared cigar ash from crystal ashtrays, wiped vivid red lipstick from the rims of wine glasses, replaced tablecloths soaked with spilled champagne. Sometimes she cleaned things that were worse, bloodstains on carpets from fights whose causes she was never meant to know, shards of broken glass from bursts of rage she was never supposed to witness. She learned not to ask, not to stare too long, not to remember what shouldn't be remembered. The VIP restrooms were the part she hated most. Cleaning mirrors, scrubbing sinks, replacing rose-scented soap for guests who could spend more in one night than she earned in an entire year. Still, she did it carefully and thoroughly, because it was her job, because Lily needed medication every month, because her mother needed someone to change her and turn her body so she wouldn't develop sores. Emma knew this building better than most of the people who worked there during the day. She knew which emergency exits tended to stick, which corners were where people often forgot their belongings, which meeting room had a broken air conditioning system every summer. She was invisible to everyone, yet she saw everything. That night, after finishing the VIP floor, Emma pushed her cart past the employee notice board near the break room. She usually ignored the papers posted there because they never concerned her. But tonight, a brightly printed notice caught her eye. Front desk receptionist wanted, full-time position, day shift, and the salary figure made her stop, 3 times what she was earning now. Premium health insurance for the entire family. Emma stood there, one hand still gripping the cart handle, her eyes reading the lines again and again. She thought of her 6 years of restaurant management experience, of the communication skills she had sharpened through thousands of demanding guests. She thought of Lily and the medical bills waiting at home. For the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to hope. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of the notice. When she got home at 7 in the morning, after giving her mother her medication and preparing breakfast for Lily, Emma sat down at the kitchen table with her old laptop. She worked on the application for 2 hours, weighing every word, every sentence. She listed her management experience, her problem-solving skills, her ability to work under pressure. Then she reached the line asking for her current position. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Janitor. She had to write janitor. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and typed the word into the empty box. She hit submit before she could change her mind. Then she sat there, staring at the confirmation screen, wondering whether she had just done the bravest thing of her life or the most foolish. 3 days passed in quiet waiting. Emma didn't dare to expect anything, yet she couldn't stop checking her phone every time it buzzed. She went to work, went home, cared for Lily, cared for her mother, then went back to work again, the familiar loop unchanged, until the afternoon of the 3rd day, as she sat by her mother's bed spooning thin porridge into her mouth. Her phone vibrated. An email from the Human Resources Department of Petrov Holdings. Her heart seemed to miss a beat. She set the bowl down and opened the email with trembling fingers. An interview invitation. Front desk position. Tuesday next week, 10 in the morning, 4th floor. Emma read it again and again 3 times, to be sure she wasn't imagining it. They wanted to see her. They really wanted to see her. Her mother looked at her with eyes that could no longer speak but still understood everything. She raised her good hand and gently touched her daughter's cheek, her mouth struggling into a crooked smile. Emma took her mother's hand and whispered that maybe everything would be all right. The first problem was clothes. Emma opened her closet and realized she had nothing suitable to wear to an interview. The office outfits from her restaurant management days had long ago been sold to pay for Lily's medicine. Her closet now held only a few worn t-shirts and faded jeans. She thought of Margaret, the 65-year-old widowed neighbor at the end of the hallway, who sometimes watched Lily for her in emergencies. Margaret had once worked as a secretary at a law firm before retiring. Emma knocked on her door that evening and awkwardly explained the situation. Margaret didn't ask many questions. She simply led Emma into the bedroom and opened her wardrobe. She took out a dark blue dress, elegant, but not stiff. It was a little loose, but Emma could adjust it with safety pins. Margaret also lent her a black blazer and a pair of small pearl earrings. Emma thanked her until she didn't know what else to say. In the days that followed, Emma spent every free minute preparing. At night, after coming home from work, after her mother and Lily were asleep, she stood in front of the narrow bathroom mirror practicing interview answers. She looked into her own eyes and spoke about her restaurant management experience, about how she handled difficult customers, about why she wanted the position. She practiced again and again until her voice no longer shook, until the answers flowed as naturally as breathing. She ironed the borrowed dress 3 times, making sure every crease was perfect. She polished the only pair of heels she still owned, old but usable if no one looked too closely. On the morning of the interview, Emma woke up at 5, even though her night shift had ended at 6. She showered, put on light makeup with lipstick and mascara borrowed from Margaret, slipped into the dark blue dress, then stood before the mirror and looked at herself. She looked like someone else. She looked like the woman she had been 3 years ago. Lily woke up as Emma was getting ready to leave. The little girl rubbed her eyes, looked at her mother in the unfamiliar outfit, then broke into a bright smile. "Mommy looks so pretty. Where are you going?" Emma knelt down, pulled her daughter into her arms, and explained that Mommy was going to apply for a new job, a better job, so she could be home with her more, so Lily could see the doctor more often. Lily was quiet for a moment, then placed her tiny hand on her mother's cheek. "I believe you can do it. You're the best, Mommy." Emma hugged her tightly, swallowing the lump in her throat. She promised she would bring back good news. She stepped out of the apartment, walked down the dim hallway, took the stairs because the elevator was broken again, and emerged into the morning sunlight. She took the bus to the Obsidian, the building she had cleaned for 3 years but had never entered through the front doors in daylight. As she stood before the massive glass entrance, looking into the brilliantly lit lobby, she felt like an outsider trying to step onto a planet that didn't belong to her. Emma stepped through the glass doors and the world shifted completely. The Obsidian lobby in daylight was flooded with natural light pouring in through towering windows, utterly unlike the quiet darkness she knew so well every night. Crystal chandeliers sparkled beneath the sun instead of artificial glow. Staff moved everywhere in tailored suits, coffee in hand, phones at their ears, walking with the confidence of people who seemed born to belong here. Emma approached the reception desk, the very place she cleaned every night, and told the young, beautiful woman behind it that she had a 10 o'clock interview. The woman looked her up and down, her gaze pausing for a brief second on Emma's worn heels, then offered a polite smile and asked her to wait. Emma chose a chair near the window, sitting straight, hands folded on her lap, trying to look natural. She watched the people around her. A man in a gray suit read the news on his tablet. 2 young women passed by, laughing about a party from the night before. A group stepped out of the elevator, all dressed in designer clothes, carrying the scent of expensive perfume. Emma felt small. The borrowed dress suddenly seemed too old, the heels too scuffed, the light makeup too thin to hide the dark circles beneath her eyes from countless sleepless nights. She told herself to stop spiraling and focus on what she knew, on what she could do. At exactly 10 o'clock, a young woman in a black business outfit approached and called her name. Emma followed her into the elevator, watching the numbers climb from 1 to 4 as her heart beat faster with each passing floor. The doors opened to a long corridor lined with glass walls and sleek modern decor. Emma had cleaned this space hundreds of times but had never walked through it during business hours, never seen it alive with people. The woman led her to a conference room at the end of the hall and opened the door. The room was bright, dominated by a long glass table, one side opening to a sweeping view of Manhattan. 3 people were already seated at the far end. The man in the center was about 45 years old, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, wearing a gray suit and a gold watch. Carter Mills, the club manager. Emma recognized him from late nights when she occasionally saw him crossing the lobby. He looked her over openly, his assessment unhidden. To his left sat a woman around 32, hair pulled into a tight bun, white blouse, her expression cool and professional. Natasha Wells, head of human resources, her name displayed on the badge clipped to her chest. To the right was a younger man, likely operations management, flipping through a folder. Emma stepped inside, smiled, and greeted them. They gestured for her to take the chair across the table. The distance between them was only a pane of glass, yet it felt like a chasm. Carter Mills began with routine questions. Could she introduce herself? Emma drew in a deep breath and began. She spoke about her 6 years as an evening shift manager at an Italian restaurant in Manhattan, about supervising a team of 15 staff members, about handling difficult customer situations. Her voice was steady and clear, the answers she had practiced hundreds of times in the mirror now flowing naturally. Natasha Wells asked about a specific situation involving a demanding guest. Emma described an incident where an intoxicated customer became aggressive toward a server, how she calmly separated them, escorted the guest to a private room, listened to his complaints, and ultimately not only resolved the issue, but turned him into a regular customer. Natasha nodded, visibly impressed, and wrote something in her notebook. The operations manager asked about communication skills and the ability to work under pressure. Emma answered each question with confidence, feeling she was doing well, feeling she might truly have a chance. Then Carter Mills leaned back in his chair, folded his arms across his chest, and asked a question that froze the room. "Where did you attend college?" Emma swallowed. She said she didn't have a college degree. She began working right after finishing high school to help support her family. Carter Mills said nothing, simply writing something in the notebook before him. Natasha Wells glanced toward the operations manager. Emma felt the shift in the room, as if the temperature had dropped a few degrees. Carter Mills turned a page in the file and continued, his tone still polite but subtly changed. "What is your current position?" Emma knew this question was coming. She had prepared for it, told herself she had to be honest because they would check anyway. She looked straight into Carter Mills's eyes and spoke without wavering. "I currently work as a night cleaning staff member at this club." Silence. Carter Mills stopped writing. Natasha Wells lifted her head and looked at Emma as if she were something unfamiliar. The operations manager closed the folder. Emma saw it all. She saw the shift in their eyes, from curiosity to surprise, then to something like pity mixed with disdain. She saw the way Carter Mills leaned back even farther, the distance between them stretching wider. He asked, his voice slow and gentle to the point of near mockery. "Do you believe you fit the image of our club?" The question didn't require an answer. They had already decided before she could open her mouth. Emma felt as though she'd been slapped hard across the face, but she didn't let it show. She kept her back straight, her gaze steady, her voice from shaking, even as something inside her shattered piece by piece. She answered that she believed her experience spoke for itself. 6 years managing a high-end restaurant, thousands of demanding customers handled, hundreds of emergency situations resolved. She knew this building better than anyone sitting in that room, because she'd walked through every corner of it for the past 3 years. Carter Mills smiled, the polite smile Emma had seen hundreds of times on the faces of people about to say no. He said they were very impressed with her experience, but this position required a certain image, a certain alignment with the club's brand. They would be in touch. Emma understood. She understood more clearly than anyone in that room realized. They wouldn't be in touch. They never intended to give her a chance once they knew who she was. They only needed a reason to reject her, and she'd handed it to them herself. She looked at the 3 people across the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Carter Mills, with the self-satisfied expression of someone who'd just confirmed a bias. Natasha Wells, her gaze cold and empty of emotion. The operations manager no longer even looked at her, his eyes fixed on his phone as if she'd already ceased to exist. She thought of Lily waiting at home, of the promise she'd made to bring back good news. She thought of the $200,000 surgery Dr. Helen Park said would be needed within the next year. She thought of the 3 years she'd spent scrubbing toilets and wiping blood from carpets for these people, invisible like a ghost, without a single thank you, without a single look of acknowledgement. She could beg, she could explain her circumstances, her daughter with a heart condition, her bedridden mother, the husband who'd vanished and left behind a mountain of debt. She could cry, plead, do anything to get this job. But she didn't. She stood up slowly, with dignity. She thanked them for taking the time to meet with her. Her voice was calm, as if they'd just discussed the weather instead of crushing her last fragile hope. She offered no further explanation, no defense, no pleading. She simply nodded in farewell, turned, and walked toward the door, each step firm against the polished wood floor, shoulders straight, head held high. She opened the conference room door and stepped out. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Emma stood alone in the long, empty hallway. Her legs began to shake. Her hands began to tremble. She pressed her back against the cold wall, closed her eyes, and tried to control her breathing as it grew shallow and fast. She didn't cry. She wouldn't allow herself to cry. Not here, not now, not within these walls. She took a deep breath, then another, until her hands stopped shaking, until her legs could move again. She walked toward the elevator, pressed the down button, and watched the numbers climb from 1 to 15. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, turning her back on the hallway, on the conference room, on the people who'd just looked at her as if she were trash. She looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors, a tired woman in a borrowed dress that hung a little loose and worn heels past their prime. But her posture remained unbroken. She carried herself with an air of quiet defiance. At least she still had that. Her dignity, the one thing they couldn't take from her. The elevator stopped at the ground floor, and Emma stepped into the lobby. Sunlight still poured through the towering glass windows. Employees still moved about with coffee in hand. Everything continued as if nothing had happened. Because to them, nothing had happened. It was just a failed interview of a janitor who didn't know her place. Emma headed toward the exit, wanting to escape this place as quickly as possible. To go home, hold Lily, and tell her that Mommy had tried her best. She was only a few steps from the glass doors when everything changed. The glass doors leading from the VIP corridor burst open, not gently but with force, slamming against the wall with a sound that made the entire lobby turn. Then everyone froze. Emma saw it before she saw him. She saw the beautiful receptionist behind the desk jump to her feet, back rigid, face drained of color. She saw the man reading the news on his tablet stand abruptly and bow his head. She saw the two young women who had been laughing fall silent, fear filling their eyes. Then she saw him. Nikolai Petrov stepped into the light of the lobby like darkness rising from hell. He was taller than Emma had imagined, at least 6'1", broad-shouldered, with the build of a predator rather than a businessman. A perfectly tailored black suit hugged his body without a single crease. His dark hair was slightly long and swept back, revealing sharp features and a jawline that looked carved from stone. But the most terrifying part was his eyes. Cold gray like steel, like a winter sky before a snowstorm, like a frozen lake hiding bodies beneath the ice. Those eyes swept across the lobby, and people lowered their heads like grass before the wind. Roman Volkov followed closely behind him. A massive man with the presence of a bear and an expressionless face. The most trusted right hand of the most powerful mafia boss in New York. Emma stood there, frozen in the center of the lobby, unsure whether to keep walking or stand still. She was just a cleaning staff member. She had nothing to do with people like this. She only needed to lower her head and pass by like everyone else. But she didn't have time to do anything. Those cold gray eyes had already found her. Nikolai Petrov stopped in the middle of the lobby, less than 5 meters from her, and looked straight into her eyes. Emma Cole. His voice was low and cold, not loud, yet it echoed through the silent space. She heard someone draw a sharp breath. She wasn't sure it wasn't her own. He knew her name. The most ruthless mafia boss in New York knew the name of a woman who scrubbed toilets. Emma didn't understand what was happening, but she maintained her poise, her gaze unwavering even as her heart slammed against her ribs. She nodded in greeting, her voice calm enough to surprise even herself. "Yes, sir." At that moment, the elevator doors opened, and Carter Mills stepped out. He was holding his phone, laughing as he spoke, unaware that the atmosphere had shifted completely. Then he looked up. His expression changed from smug to terrified in an instant when he saw Nikolai Petrov standing in the lobby. He hurriedly ended the call and rushed forward, stumbling over his greeting. "Mr. Petrov, I didn't know you were coming today. Is there something I can—" Nikolai didn't look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Emma. "She interviewed for the receptionist position, didn't she?" Emma nodded, not understanding how he knew, not understanding why he cared. Carter Mills looked from Nikolai to Emma and back again, his face turning pale as paper. "Yes, sir. She interviewed this morning. And the result?" Carter swallowed. We found her not suitable for the image of the club, sir." Nikolai finally turned his gaze to Carter, and Emma saw the man who had sat across from her with quiet arrogance shrink like a mouse before a cobra. Not suitable for the image. Nikolai repeated each word slowly, his voice cold as ice. Not suitable because she lacks experience. Carter shook his head quickly. "No, sir. Her experience is very strong, but not suitable because she lacks communication skills." "No, sir. Her skills are—" "Then not suitable because she cleans your floors every night." The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Carter Mills opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face went from pale to ashen gray. A deadly silence swallowed the lobby. Emma stood there, barely breathing, not understanding what was unfolding. Nikolai stepped toward her, each movement slow and deliberate, until he stood less than a meter away. "Do you know that I review the security footage of this building every day?" Emma shook her head, her heart pounding wildly. "I've watched you work for 3 years, Nikolai said, his voice still cold but carrying something else she couldn't name. "You've never been late by a single minute. You've never done any task carelessly. You've never complained. Even when cleaning things no one should have to clean. You work as if someone is always watching, even when you believe no one is." Emma didn't know what to say. She stood there, trapped by the intensity of his gaze, wanting to step back but unable to move. "And today, I watched the interview room camera," Nikolai continued, his voice dropping lower. "I saw how they looked at you when they learned who you were. I saw how they decided to reject you before you even finished speaking. And I saw how you stood up and walked away without begging for a single word." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "That is why I am here." Emma stood there, facing the most powerful man in New York, not knowing how to react. Around them, the entire lobby remained frozen in silence. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Carter Mills stood a few meters away, his face white as a corpse, sweat beading across his forehead. Nikolai Petrov took one more step toward Emma, closing the distance until she could smell his cologne, expensive and dark, much like the man himself. "I don't give second chances," he said, his voice low and cold as steel. "But I do give first chances to people who are rejected unjustly." Emma didn't understand what he was saying. All she knew was that her heart was racing, her thoughts were spinning, and her legs were trembling even as she fought to keep them steady. Nikolai turned his gaze toward Carter Mills, his eyes so cold that Emma watched the man shrink a little more where he stood. "You will place her in the receptionist training program. 2 months. If she passes, the position is hers." It wasn't a question. It was an order. Carter Mills nodded repeatedly, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. I'll arrange everything immediately." Nikolai didn't spare Carter another glance. He turned back to Emma, his gray eyes piercing as if reading every thought in her mind. "You will be trained like any other candidate. No special treatment, no exceptions. If you're not capable, you'll be dismissed. But if you prove you're worthy, the position is yours." Emma finally found her voice. "Why?" she asked, rougher than she intended. "Why are you doing this?" Nikolai tilted his head slightly, a small gesture that made her feel like prey being assessed by a hunter. "Because you didn't beg," he said. "Because when they looked at you like you were nothing, you rose with unyielding grace and walked away with fearless dignity. You kept your dignity when you had nothing left to lose. That can't be taught." Emma didn't know what to say. She had prepared for rejection, for failure, for returning home empty-handed. She hadn't prepared for this. Nikolai continued, his voice still cold but layered with something else, something almost gentle, though Emma wasn't sure she wasn't imagining it. "And if you complete the training program, I'll consider covering your daughter's medical expenses." Emma froze. It felt like someone had punched the air out of her chest. He knew. He knew about Lily, but how? She couldn't finish the question. Nikolai looked at her, his gray eyes revealing no emotion at all. "I know everything about the people who work for me," he said, as casually as if discussing the weather. Not the fact that he'd dissected her private life. "I know you have a 6-year-old daughter named Lily with a congenital heart condition. I know your mother suffered a stroke and is bedridden. I know your former husband disappeared and left behind gambling debts. I know you live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with rent overdue by 2 months. A chill ran down Emma's spine. He knew everything. Every small, miserable detail of her life, laid bare. She should have been afraid. She should have turned and run as far from this man and his dark world as possible. But she thought of Lily. She thought of the $200,000 surgery. She thought of her daughter's eyes that morning, bright with faith, telling her mommy was the best. Emma took a deep breath, looked straight into Nikolai Petrov's cold gray eyes, and asked the one question she knew she had to ask. "What do I have to pay?" Something flickered in Nikolai's eyes. Surprise. Respect. Emma couldn't tell. He studied her for another moment. Then the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, just something close to faint amusement. "You just work," he said. "No hidden conditions. No other obligations. You train, you learn, you work. If you're good enough, you have the job. If you're not, you leave. It's that simple." Emma looked at him, trying to read something behind that icy mask. She found nothing, but she also found no lie. She glanced past him at Carter Mills, standing pale and rigid, his eyes filled with fear and resentment as he looked at her. She saw Roman Volkov beside Nikolai, his face as expressionless as stone, yet his eyes held a trace of something like curiosity. She thought of Lily waiting at home. She thought of her mother lying helpless in bed. She thought of the 3 years she'd spent scrubbing floors and toilets in the dark. She had no choice. She never had. Emma nodded. "I accept." Nikolai held her gaze for one long moment, his gray eyes still giving nothing away. Then he nodded, turned, and walked back toward the VIP doors he'd come through. Roman Volkov followed without looking back. Just before disappearing beyond the doorway, Nikolai stopped and spoke without turning around. "Monday next week, 8 in the morning. Don't be late." Then he stepped into the shadows, and the doors closed behind him. Emma remained standing there in the bright lobby, feeling as though she'd just signed a pact with the devil. The following Monday, Emma arrived at the Petrov Holdings building at 7:30 in the morning, a full half-hour earlier than required. She wore the dress borrowed from Margaret, the only outfit she owned that was respectable enough for a corporate environment. The main Petrov Holdings headquarters stood a few blocks from the Obsidian, a 40-story glass tower rising over Manhattan like a monument to power and money. Emma paused before the revolving doors, drew in a deep breath, then stepped inside. The reception lobby was vast, with black and white marble floors, crystal chandeliers suspended high above, and a massive wall engraved with the words Petrov Holdings in polished steel. Emma approached the reception desk and said she had an appointment with Human Resources. The young woman behind the counter looked her over, checked a list, then made a phone call upstairs. A few minutes later, a woman emerged from the elevator. Natasha Wells, the same cold woman who had sat in the interview room that day. Emma felt her body tense, but she kept her expression calm. Natasha looked at her without showing any emotion. "Follow me." Emma followed Natasha into the elevator and up to the 3rd floor, where the Human Resources offices were located. They walked down a long corridor lined with glass offices on both sides. Emma could feel eyes turning toward her. Whispers rose behind her like the rustling of dry leaves. She couldn't make out the words, but she didn't need to. She knew they were talking about her. Rumors spread faster than fire inside a large organization. The story of the janitor personally intervened, for by the Mafia boss himself had become the subject of gossip throughout the building in just a few days. Natasha led her into a small office and handed her a thick stack of documents. A probationary contract, confidentiality agreements, internal regulations, and dozens of other forms. Emma sat down and began reading each page, signing every line with care. Natasha stood there watching her, saying nothing, but Emma felt the weight of her appraisal. When the paperwork was complete, Natasha took her to the training room on the 10th floor. The room was spacious, with tables arranged in a U-shape, a large presentation screen at the front, and 4 people already seated. 3 women and 1 man, all younger than Emma, likely around 22 or 23, with the bright confidence of recent graduates from prestigious universities. They turned to look as Emma entered. She saw curiosity in their eyes, then surprise when they realized she was older, then a flicker of something like disdain as they whispered among themselves. "Is that her? The janitor? I heard Mr. Petrov personally. How did she get in here? There must be something going on." Emma heard everything. Every word, every whisper, every judging glance. It felt like 1,000 needles pressing into her skin, but she didn't show it. She walked to the last empty chair, sat down, placed her bag beside her, and looked straight ahead. She didn't owe them an explanation. She didn't need their approval. She only needed to do her job well. She thought of Lily at home with her grandmother. She thought of her daughter's smile that morning when she said Mommy was starting a new job. She thought of everything she'd endured over the past 3 years and told herself that a few whispers meant nothing. She had scrubbed blood from floors. She had cleaned toilets at 3 in the morning. She had swallowed tears night after night while staring at stacks of medical bills. A few looks of contempt from children who hadn't yet tasted life couldn't break her. Emma took a deep breath, sat up straight, and waited for the training to begin. What they thought of her didn't matter. Only the results did. At exactly 8 o'clock, the training room door opened and a woman walked in. Clara Henderson, the lead trainer of the program, about 45 years old, with neatly cropped brown hair and eyes as sharp as blades. She had spent 15 years managing 5-star hotels before moving into training for Petrov Holdings. Emma knew this because she had researched the program all week long, reading every piece of information she could find to prepare herself. Clara stood at the front of the room and slowly scanned each trainee. Her gaze lingered on Emma for a second longer than the others, but she revealed no emotion. "I don't care who you are, where you come from, or who brought you here," Clara began, her voice clear and firm. "I only care about what you can do. Over the next 2 months, I will teach you everything you need to know to become a professional receptionist. If you're not capable, you'll be eliminated. No exceptions." Emma felt a quiet surge of respect for the woman. No favoritism, no prejudice. Only ability mattered. That was all she had ever wanted. The first week focused on communication skills and conflict handling. Clara lectured on body language, on maintaining eye contact, on the art of listening and showing empathy to guests. The theory wasn't difficult for Emma because she had lived these principles for 6 years as a restaurant manager. Still, she took meticulous notes, refusing to miss a single detail. The other trainees watched her write with expressions that mixed surprise and disdain. A blonde woman named Jessica whispered to the person beside her, loud enough for Emma to hear. "Why is she writing so much? What good is toilet cleaning experience anyway?" Emma pretended not to hear and kept writing. On the third day, Clara began practical exercises. She played the role of a difficult customer and asked each trainee to handle the situation. The first was a young man named Kevin, a hospitality management graduate from Cornell University. He stammered when Clara shouted about a VIP room not being ready on time. He tried to explain himself, grew more flustered with every word, and finally stood there red-faced, completely lost. Clara shook her head and called the next trainee. Jessica stepped forward confidently, but when Clara began snarling about unprofessional staff, Jessica's voice started to shake, and she eventually burst into tears. Clara sighed and called the next name. One by one, they failed. They had theory. They had degrees, but they didn't have experience facing real anger from real customers. "Emma Cole," Clara called last. Emma stood and walked forward. She felt the weight of eyes on her back, waiting for her to fail like the others. Clara fixed her with a cold stare and began the act. "What kind of employee lets a customer wait 15 minutes?" she barked, slamming her hand on the table. "I'm a VIP guest. I don't have time for this level of unprofessionalism. Call your manager right now." Emma didn't step back. She met Clara's eyes, her expression calm, her voice gentle but steady. "Mom, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience. I understand your time is extremely valuable and that this delay is unacceptable. Please allow me to personally resolve the issue for you right now. While you wait, I'd like to offer you a complimentary glass of champagne in our private lounge area." Clara didn't stop. She continued to snarl, adding unreasonable demands, deliberately pushing Emma into difficult territory. But Emma didn't waver. She handled each situation naturally, not by following a script or a textbook, but by instinct sharpened through thousands of nights dealing with drunk and furious customers in a restaurant. Finally, Clara stopped. She looked at Emma for a long moment, then turned to the class. "This is the correct approach," Clara said, her voice still strict but carrying something close to approval. "She doesn't argue. She doesn't make excuses. She doesn't panic. She acknowledges the problem, empathizes with the customer, and offers a solution immediately. That's experience, not theory." Emma returned to her seat and felt the shift in the other trainees' gazes. The contempt was gone. In its place was surprise, and perhaps even a reluctant respect. That evening, Emma went home and told Lily about her day. The little girl sat on the bed, eyes sparkling, clapping her hands and laughing as she listened to her mother describe how she handled a difficult customer. "Mommy is amazing," Lily said, throwing her arms around her. "I knew it. I knew you were the best." Emma held her tightly, feeling every humiliation of the day melt away inside that small, warm embrace. The second week began with technical systems, and Emma knew this would be her greatest challenge. Clara introduced the customer management software the club used, a complex system with dozens of different functions: booking VIP rooms, managing guest lists, coordinating with security, tracking special requests for loyal clients, handling payments and invoices. The computer screen filled with icons, menus, and pop-up windows Emma had never seen before. The other trainees moved through the functions with ease. Kevin typed rapidly, his eyes never leaving the screen. Jessica navigated between features as if she'd been born knowing how to do it. They had grown up with technology. Computers were a natural part of their lives from childhood. Emma was different. She was 27 years old, and the old laptop at home was used only for job applications and checking email. She'd never worked with a system this complex. Her fingers fumbled on the keyboard, her eyes darted between windows, and her mind spun as she tried to remember each step. Clara walked around the room observing every trainee. When she reached Emma's station, she paused briefly, looked at her screen, then moved on without a word. Emma knew she was falling behind. She felt it in Clara's glance, in Jessica's quiet giggle when she peeked at Emma's screen, in Kevin's look when he finished the task 10 minutes before she did. But Emma didn't give up. Every evening after training, when the other trainees packed up and left, Emma asked Clara for permission to stay. She sat alone in the empty training room under harsh fluorescent lights, eyes fixed on the computer screen. She practiced each function again and again, wrote every step into a small notebook, created hypothetical scenarios, and trained herself to handle them. On the third night of that week, Emma was practicing alone at 8 in the evening when she sensed a shift in the air. She didn't hear footsteps or a door opening, but she knew someone was there. She turned, and her heart seemed to skip a beat. Nikolai Petrov stood in the doorway of the training room, one shoulder resting against the frame, cold gray eyes fixed on her without blinking. He wore his usual black suit, flawless and unwrinkled, looking as though he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine made for demons. Emma didn't know how long he'd been standing there. She didn't know what to say. She simply sat frozen in her chair, staring at him. Nikolai said nothing. He only watched her with eyes that revealed nothing. Then he stepped inside, slow and deliberate, and sat in the chair across from her at the long table. Emma felt her heart racing. She didn't know what he wanted, didn't know if she'd done something wrong, didn't know whether she should speak or stay silent. She chose to keep working. She turned back to the screen, forcing herself to focus on the task even as her hands trembled slightly, and her mind remained painfully aware of his presence across the table. She felt his gaze on her like an invisible weight. 10 minutes passed in silence. Emma completed the task, reviewed the result, corrected a small error, and saved the file. She didn't look at Nikolai, but she knew he was still watching. When she finally lifted her head, Nikolai stood. He looked at her for another second, then spoke, his voice low and cold as ever, but carrying something else she couldn't name. Quiet effort is worth more than loud talent. Then he turned and walked out, disappearing into the shadowed hallway without looking back. Emma sat there, watching him go, her heart still pounding. She didn't understand why he'd come, why he'd sat down to watch her work, or what his words truly meant. But she understood one thing. He was watching her. He was still watching her the way he'd watched her for 3 years through security cameras. The thought frightened her. Yet strangely, it also comforted her. She wasn't invisible. Someone was seeing her try. In the 3rd week, Clara took the entire group to the Obsidian to learn the real-world operating procedures. Emma stepped into the familiar building, but this time through the front entrance in daylight, not the back door at midnight. The feeling was strange, as if she were looking into a parallel world she had once belonged to, but had never truly been welcomed into. Clara led them through the main lobby, explaining the layout of the reception desk, the guest greeting process, and coordination with the security team. These were things Emma had known for a long time, having watched them unfold through thousands of nights in the shadows, but she still listened carefully and took diligent notes, never revealing that she knew every corner of this building like the lines of her own hand. Then Clara took them up to the VIP level. The elevator stopped on the 2nd floor, and when the doors opened, the hallway beyond felt entirely different from the floors below. The lighting was dimmer, the color palette darker, the air heavier. "This level is reserved for our most exclusive clients," Clara explained, lowering her voice as if afraid someone might overhear. "The most important dealings happen here. From time to time, you'll be assigned to work on this floor, and there are rules you must follow without exception." She stopped and looked at each trainee with grave seriousness. "Don't ask, don't look, don't listen, don't remember. No matter what you see or hear, you saw nothing and heard nothing. Do you understand?" Emma understood. She had understood long before Clara ever said it. She had cleaned these rooms for 3 years, seen things that shouldn't be seen, and learned how to turn away and forget instantly. But the others didn't understand. Kevin looked around with open curiosity. Jessica whispered something to the person beside her. They thought this was just a luxury club for wealthy clients. They didn't realize they were standing inside the territory of the most powerful underground empire in the city. Clara guided them down the corridor, explaining the VIP rooms, the service procedures, and how to handle special requests. As they passed one closed door, it suddenly flew open. 2 large men in black suits stepped out, dragging another man between them. The man wore a gray suit that had once been expensive but was now wrinkled and smeared with blood. His face was swollen, one eye bruised dark purple, blood running from his nose to his lips. He tried to say something, but only broken groans came out. The 2 men hauled him down the hallway like a sack of grain, not sparing the frozen trainees a glance. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and they disappeared inside with the bloodied man. Emma heard Jessica suck in a sharp breath. Kevin stood pale as a sheet. None of the other trainees dared to move. Only Emma remained still, her face expressionless. She had seen scenes like this before, late at night while cleaning the VIP floor. She had learned not to react, not to think, not to remember. "Keep moving," Clara said calmly, as if nothing had happened. "Remember what I told you. See nothing, hear nothing." They continued on, but Emma felt the shift within the group. Jessica trembled for the rest of the session. Kevin didn't say a single word. They finally understood where they were and who they were working for. That night, Emma went home and slept, holding Lily in her arms. The little girl curled against her, breathing evenly and peacefully. Emma watched her daughter's innocent face in the dim light and wondered what kind of world she was stepping into. She was accepting protection from a man who could order someone beaten without blinking. What was she trading for this chance? Then she thought of Lily's surgery, of the $200,000 she could never earn by scrubbing floors. She closed her eyes and held her child tighter. There are things a mother is willing to do for her child, even stepping into the darkness. In the 4th week, Clara assigned each trainee a mentor from the current reception team. Emma was paired with David Chen, an Asian man around 48 years old with salt and pepper hair and calm, observant eyes. David had worked as a receptionist at the Obsidian for 6 years and was one of the few veterans who had managed to remain. On their first day working together, he walked Emma through the club and spoke about things Clara never mentioned in class. "I've heard about you," David said as they stood in a corner of the lobby watching people come and go. "The interview." Mr. Petrov stepping in personally. "The whole building knows." Emma said nothing, keeping her gaze forward. She was used to being talked about behind her back. "I also heard how you handled yourself in that interview," David continued, his tone even and without judgment. "The way you stood up and walked away without begging. I respect that." Emma turned to look at him, surprised. He was the first person besides Nikolai Petrov who spoke as if what she had done that day was something to admire, rather than pity. In the days that followed, David taught Emma things no textbook ever covered. He taught her how to read the body language of VIP guests, how to tell who was tense, who was dangerous, who was on the verge of causing trouble. He taught her how to recognize members of different crews by small details like tattoos, the way they stood, the way they scanned a room. He taught her how to protect herself. If a situation feels tight, step back, find the nearest exit, and alert security immediately, David said one afternoon as they stood in a quiet lobby. "Never try to be a hero. You're not paid to be a hero. You're paid to survive." Emma nodded, committing every word to memory. On the last day of the week, as they sat resting in the staff room, David suddenly lowered his voice. "There's something I want to say." He glanced around to be sure no one else was listening. "About Mr. Petrov." Emma lifted her head, her heart beating a little faster. "I don't know why he's interested in you, and I don't ask because it's not my place," David said slowly, choosing each word with care. "But there's one thing I know for certain after 6 years working here. Mr. Petrov never does anything without a reason. Never." Emma looked at him without speaking. "He might be helping you because he sees potential in you, or he might have other reasons you don't see yet." David met Emma's eyes directly. "I'm not saying he's a bad man. I'm just saying you should be careful. In this world, kindness is never free." Emma nodded. She understood what David was warning her about. She had asked herself that question hundreds of times over the past weeks. Why did Nikolai Petrov care about her? A ruthless Mafia boss was not a man anyone could describe with the word kindness. There was something she didn't see, something she didn't understand. But she had no other choice. She had already stepped into this world and there was no turning back. All she could do was keep moving forward and hope that whatever the price might be, she would be able to pay it. That evening, Emma came home later than usual because she had stayed to finish a weekend practice assignment. She stepped out of the elevator on the 5th floor of the aging apartment building, her legs aching after a long day, her mind fixed only on holding Lily and falling into a deep sleep. But when she turned into the hallway leading to her apartment, she stopped short. A man was standing in front of her door, tall and thin, narrow shoulders, untrimmed messy hair, wearing an old leather jacket she recognized instantly because she had bought it for him 4 years earlier for his birthday. Jason, her ex-husband. The man who had abandoned her and Lily 3 years ago without a single goodbye was standing there as if he had never disappeared. He turned when he heard her footsteps. His face was thinner than she remembered, cheekbones sharp, eyes sunken with dark circles beneath them. He looked like an addict in withdrawal or a gambler who had lost everything, probably both. "Emma," he said, smiling in a way he likely thought was charming but only made her feel sick. "Long time no see." Emma stayed where she was, 5 meters away, not moving any closer. Her body went rigid, every instinct on high alert. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice cold. Jason lifted his hands in a mock gesture of surrender. "Easy now. I just want to talk. I heard you got a new job. A really good job. Working for Petrov Holdings. Right. And I also heard the big boss is taking a personal interest in you." Emma felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. He knew. He had picked up the rumors somewhere and come back. Not for Lily. Not out of regret. But because he smelled money. "It has nothing to do with you," Emma said, stepping toward her door. Leave. But Jason didn't move. He stepped into her path, his smile fading into the calculating expression she remembered all too well from the days he still lived with her and lied about where the money went. I have rights to Lily too, he said, lowering his voice. I'm her father. I want to see my daughter. Emma laughed, a dry and bitter sound. You want to see the daughter you abandoned when she was 3 and needed heart surgery. The daughter you didn't call once in 3 years. The daughter you didn't send a single dollar to help buy medication while you gambled everything away. Jason's face darkened. He stepped closer, close enough for Emma to smell alcohol and cheap cigarettes on his breath. I can sue for custody, he said, his voice threatening. I'm her biological father. The court will side with me. But if you give me some money, I'll disappear. You've got the big boss watching you now. You must have plenty of cash, right? Emma looked at him, into the eyes of the man she had once loved, once believed would stand beside her for life. She saw nothing but greed and smallness. She didn't know what she had ever seen in him, or maybe he had simply been good at hiding who he really was. You have no rights to Lily, Emma said, her voice calm but hard as steel. You left without a word. You paid nothing. You didn't exist in her life for 3 years. Any court would see you as an irresponsible father who abandoned his child when she needed him most. Jason took another step forward, his face twisting with anger. Don't get smart with me, he snarled. Who do you think you are? You're just a janitor. Don't forget that. I'll turn your life into hell if you don't give me what I want. Emma didn't step back. She had stepped back too much in her life. Back from circumstances. Back from fate. Back from injustice. She wasn't stepping back anymore. She looked straight into Jason's eyes and spoke slowly, each word clear and cold. Leave. Don't ever appear in front of me or my daughter again. If you dare come near Lily, I swear you'll regret it. Jason stood there for a moment, hatred burning in his eyes. Then he gave a short, humorless laugh. Fine, he said, taking a step back. But this isn't over. You'll see. The court will decide. He turned and walked down the hallway, disappearing into the stairwell. Emma stood there, watching until he was gone. Then she unlocked her apartment door with trembling hands, stepped inside, and locked it behind her. She leaned against the door, closed her eyes, and tried to steady her breathing as it grew fast and shallow. Mommy, why are you crying? Lily's voice came from the bedroom. Emma opened her eyes and saw her daughter standing in the doorway, wide eyes filled with worry. She hadn't realized she was crying until that moment. She wiped her tears quickly and forced a smile. It's nothing, sweetheart. Just dust in Mommy's eyes. Lily looked at her with eyes far too perceptive for her age. She didn't believe it, but she didn't ask more. She simply ran forward and hugged her, small arms wrapping around Emma's waist, whispering softly, Don't worry, Mommy. I'm here with you. Emma held her tightly and let the tears fall in silence. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, afraid Jason would carry out his threat, afraid he would destroy everything she was trying to build. She didn't know that someone had been watching that entire confrontation from beginning to end. The next morning, Emma arrived at the training room with dark circles under her eyes from a sleepless night. She tried to focus on Clara's lecture, but her thoughts kept returning to the confrontation with Jason the night before. What would he do? Would he really take her to court? Could she afford a lawyer? Would she lose Lily? The questions spun through her mind like an unrelenting storm. Mid-morning, while the group was practicing on the computer system, the training room door suddenly opened. Roman Volkov walked in, his face as expressionless as stone. He scanned the room once, then his gaze settled on Emma. Emma Cole, Mr. Petrov wants to see you. Now. The room fell silent. Clara stopped speaking mid-sentence. The other trainees turned to look at Emma with a mix of curiosity, shock, and envy. Emma felt her heart race, but she kept her expression composed, stood up, and followed Roman without a word. They took the elevator up to the 40th floor, the highest level of the building, a place Emma had never set foot in before. The doors opened to a short hallway with thick black carpet and dark wood paneled walls. At the end stood a massive double door. Roman led her to it, knocked twice, then opened the door and motioned for her to enter. Emma stepped across the threshold, and her breath caught in her throat. The room was as large as her entire apartment, with soaring ceilings and a vast glass wall overlooking all of Manhattan. The design was minimal, yet every object radiated immeasurable expense. A dark wood desk stood before the glass wall, and seated behind it was Nikolai Petrov. Light poured in from behind him, turning him into a dark silhouette against the skyline. Only his gray eyes caught the light as he watched her enter. "Close the door," Nikolai said to Roman, and the door clicked shut behind Emma. She stood alone in the room with the most powerful man in New York, unsure whether to step forward or remain where she was. Nikolai gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Emma walked toward it, feeling his eyes track her every movement. She sat down, her frame composed and resolute, her hands resting on her thighs, forcing herself to appear calm while she trembled inside. Silence stretched for several seconds. Nikolai studied her, his gray eyes revealing nothing. Then he spoke, his voice low and cold as always. "What does your ex-husband want?" Emma froze. It felt like a fist had slammed into her stomach. He knew. He knew about Jason. But how? She faltered, unable to finish the question. Nikolai looked at her steadily. "I assigned protection to watch you from the day you began the training program." The blood in Emma's veins turned to ice. Protection. Watching her, he had placed people on her without her knowledge for weeks. They had seen her go to work each day, seen her come home every night, seen her take Lily to school, seen her buy medicine for her mother. They had seen Jason arrive the night before, heard every word he said, witnessed every second of that confrontation. "Why?" Emma asked, her voice shaking more than she wanted. "Why did you have me watched?" Nikolai stood, stepped away from his desk, and walked toward the glass wall. He stopped there, his back to her, looking out over the city below. "Because you belong to me now," he said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. "You work for me. You are under my protection. No one is allowed to touch what is mine." A surge of anger flared in Emma's chest. She stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. "I am not your property," she said, her voice rising despite herself. "You have no right to invade my private life like that." Nikolai turned to face her. For the first time, Emma saw something flicker in those cold gray eyes. Not anger, but something almost like amusement. "You are angry with me," he said. Not as a question, but an observation. "You are standing in my office, raising your voice at me, while most people are afraid to meet my eyes." Emma suddenly realized what she was doing. She was shouting at a Mafia boss, a man who could order someone killed without blinking. She should have been afraid. She should have apologized and lowered her head. But she didn't. She was too exhausted to be afraid. She met Nikolai's gaze and asked again, "Then what are you going to do?" "About my ex-husband." Nikolai walked toward her, slow and deliberate, until he stood an arm's length away. "Do you want me to handle it?" Emma hesitated. She knew that handle, in Nikolai Petrov's language, could mean many things, none of them gentle. "I don't want you to hurt him," she said at last. "I just want him to stay away from my daughter." Nikolai studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes piercing, as if reading every thought in her mind. Then he nodded. "Very well," he said. "He will stay away from you and your daughter. I promise." Emma didn't know how much a promise from a Mafia boss was worth, but strangely, she believed him. A week passed, and Jason did not appear. Emma waited every day, expecting a knock at the door, a call from a lawyer, a summons from the court, but nothing came. The silence stretched on so long that it began to frighten her in a different way. She wondered what Nikolai had done, whether Jason was still alive, whether she had unknowingly become complicit in a crime. Then the news came from the least expected source. Margaret, the widowed neighbor who had lent her the dress for the interview, knocked on Emma's apartment door one evening. She said she had run into an old friend who worked at a bank, and that friend mentioned Jason Brooks had come in and paid off every debt he owed. Not only that, he had cleared all his gambling debts with other lenders across the city. Margaret added that he had moved to Florida, left New York entirely, and no one knew where the money had come from. Emma sat there listening, her mind spinning. Jason, who did not have a dollar to his name, who had come to threaten her for money, had suddenly paid everything and vanished to another state. It did not take a genius to understand what had happened. The next morning, instead of going to the training room, Emma went straight to the 40th floor. She walked past Roman Volkov, standing guard in the hallway without a word, went straight to the double doors, and pushed them open. Nikolai sat behind his desk reading a file. He looked up when she entered, his gray eyes showing no surprise at her uninvited intrusion. Roman appeared behind Emma, his hand moving toward her shoulder as if to pull her back, but Nikolai spoke calmly and Roman released her at once. The door closed, leaving Emma alone with him again. "What did you do to Jason?" Emma asked directly. Nikolai set the file down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at her with a calm that felt almost cruel. "I gave him a choice." What choice? Emma stepped closer to the desk, her hands clenched at her sides. Disappear, Nikolai replied evenly, as if discussing the weather, or disappear another way. A chill ran down Emma's spine. She knew what the other way meant in Nikolai Petrov's world. She should have been afraid. She should have been horrified that she had indirectly forced a man to flee the city to save his life. But that man had abandoned her daughter when she needed him most. He had left her with crushing debt and vanished without a word. He had come back only to threaten and extort her. She felt no pity, only relief. And that realization frightened her. What do I owe you? Emma asked hoarsely. For this. For everything. You gave me the training opportunity. You dealt with my ex-husband. You had me protected. What do I owe you? Nikolai stood, walked around the desk, and stopped less than a meter from her. Emma did not step back, though her heart was pounding. You owe me nothing, he said, his voice lower and softer than she had ever heard it. I did this because I wanted to, not because I expect repayment. Emma looked up at him, searching his eyes for deception or some hidden motive, but she found none. She saw only a cold sincerity, if such a thing could exist. Why? She whispered. Why do you care about me? Nikolai was silent for a long moment, then turned toward the glass wall and looked out over the city. His back was to her, broad shoulders straight as stone. When I was 12, my mother died, he said quietly. She was beaten by my father for years. One night he hit her too hard and she never woke up. Emma stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. She had never expected this. I had a sister, Nikolai continued, his voice steady but fractured beneath the surface, 5 years younger than me. After my mother died, I tried to protect her from our father, but I was only a child. I had no power, no money, nothing. He stopped, the silence stretching so long Emma thought he might not continue. Then he spoke again, his voice distant. She was sick. A heart condition, like your daughter. And I had no money to save her. I watched her die a little more every day, unable to do anything. Tears burned in Emma's eyes. She looked at the broad back of Nikolai Petrov, at shoulders carrying the weight of a brutal past, and for the first time she did not see a monster. She saw a man who had lost too much. I hate men who abandon their families, Nikolai said, turning back to her, his gray eyes still cold but cracked by an old wound that never healed. I hate irresponsible fathers, and I hate seeing mothers forced to fight alone. You owe me nothing, Emma. I did this because I will not watch another child die for lack of money. It was the first time he spoke her name. Not Miss Cole, not her, but Emma. The sound of it in his low voice felt like a promise, an acknowledgement, something she did not dare to name. Emma stood there, looking at the man before her, and for the first time she saw the human being beneath the armor, an old scar, an unending pain, a reason for both cruelty and kindness. She said nothing, only nodded, turned, and walked out of the room. But when the door closed behind her, she knew something had changed. She was no longer afraid of Nikolai Petrov. She was beginning to understand him. 2 months passed faster than Emma had expected. The final day of the training program arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Yellow leaves scattered across the sidewalks of Manhattan. Clara held the final evaluation in the large conference room on the 10th floor, calling each trainee in one by one to review results and make decisions. Emma waited outside in the hallway, watching each person enter and then come back out. Kevin came out first, his face relaxed, giving her a small nod before heading toward the elevators. Jessica followed, her eyes slightly red as if she had been crying, but she nodded as well, signaling she had passed. One by one, the others finished. Then it was Emma's turn. She stood up, took a deep breath, and walked into the conference room. Clara sat alone at the head of the long table, a thick file folder and a pen laid out neatly in front of her. Sunlight from the window lit her face, highlighting the fine lines around the eyes of a woman who had spent her life working hard. Sit down, Emma, Clara said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Emma sat with a professional stillness, waiting for the verdict that would decide her future and Lily's. Clara opened the file, flipped through a few pages, then looked up at her. Silence stretched for several seconds. Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you walk into the training room? Clara asked, her voice neutral. Emma shook her head. I thought you would be the first one eliminated, Clara said plainly. I heard the rumors. I knew how you got here, and I assumed you were just a special case without real ability. Emma felt her chest tighten, but she stayed silent, waiting. I was wrong, Clara said, and for the first time Emma saw the hint of a smile on that severe face. You exceeded my expectations. She turned the file so Emma could see the evaluations inside. Your communication skills score is the highest in the class, Clara said, pointing to a line on the page. Your real-world experience shows in how you handle every situation. You do not need textbooks to tell you what to do because you have lived through it. Emma looked at the scores, at Clara's handwritten notes, and felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Someone was finally seeing what she could do, not what she had been. As for the technical systems, you started slower than the others, Clara continued. But you stayed late every day to practice. You worked twice as hard, 3 times as hard as anyone else, and in the end, your results matched, and in some cases surpassed, those of the younger trainees. Clara closed the file and looked directly at Emma. Your work ethic is an example to everyone else. You never complained, never made excuses, never gave up no matter how difficult things became. That cannot be taught. That has to already be inside you. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table in front of Emma. This is the recommendation for your appointment as an official receptionist at the Obsidian, Clara said, picking up the pen and signing at the bottom without hesitation. You earned this position. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Emma stared at Clara's signature on the page, at her own name typed neatly on the line marked recommended candidate, and felt tears threaten to spill. She blinked quickly and swallowed the lump in her throat. Thank you, Emma said softly, her voice trembling. You are the first person who judged me fairly. Clara looked at her, the severity in her eyes softening just a little. I did not judge you fairly, she said. I judged you based on what you showed me, and you showed me that you are the best in this group. Now go. You have a new job to prepare for. Emma's first official day as a receptionist at the Obsidian fell on a Monday morning in early November. She woke at 5, even though her shift didn't begin until 9. She showered carefully, blow-dried her hair until it was completely dry, applied light but professional makeup exactly as Clara had taught her, then opened her closet and took out the suit she had bought with her first paycheck from the training program. It was a black suit, tailored to fit. Not an expensive designer label, but elegant and professional. For the first time in 3 years, Emma was wearing something that truly belonged to her, not borrowed, not a leftover from her old restaurant manager days. She stood in front of the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. That woman looked confident, polished, like she belonged in places of power and quiet luxury. Mom, you're so beautiful. Lily's voice came from behind her. Emma turned to see her daughter standing in the bedroom doorway, wide eyes glowing. Lily ran to her and wrapped her small arms tightly around Emma's waist. You look like a princess from a movie, she whispered. Emma bent down and kissed the top of her daughter's head, breathing in the familiar sweet scent of children's shampoo. She wasn't a princess. She was just a mother trying to survive. But in Lily's eyes, that was worth more than any crown. She arrived at the Obsidian at 8:30, half an hour early. She walked through the massive glass doors, crossed the lobby she had scrubbed for 3 years, and stepped up to the reception desk. David was already there, a warm smile on his face when he saw her. First day, he said with a nod. Ready? Emma took her place beside him, resting her hands on the polished black marble counter. She looked out over the vast lobby, daylight pouring through the towering glass windows, illuminating every corner of the space. For 3 years, she had only been allowed here at night, when no one was around, invisible as a ghost. Now she stood here in full daylight, seen. I'm ready, she said. The morning passed in a steady rush of work. Guests came and went. Phones rang constantly. The reservation system needed constant updates. Emma handled each task calmly and professionally, everything she had learned over the past 2 months now flowing as naturally as breathing. She greeted guests with the right balance of warmth and restraint, verified identities quickly and discreetly, guided them exactly where they needed to go. David worked beside her, offering the occasional quiet suggestion, but mostly observing and nodding in approval. In the afternoon, as Emma was reviewing the VIP reservations for the evening, a man entered the lobby with the air of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He was around 50, silver hair neatly combed, wearing a 3-piece gray suit with a gold watch gleaming at his wrist. 2 large bodyguards followed him, along with a young woman carrying an expensive designer bag. He walked straight to the desk, ignoring the 2 people already waiting. Where's my room? He demanded, his sharp voice aimed somewhere above Emma's head as if she didn't exist. Emma recognized him instantly from the VIP list she had memorized. Victor Castellano, one of the club's most important clients and a business partner of Petrov Holdings. A man who could not be offended. Mr. Castellano, Your VIP room is being prepared, Emma said calmly and politely. However, you've arrived 30 minutes earlier than your scheduled time. Please allow us about 10 minutes to complete the setup. Castellano's expression darkened. He finally looked directly at her, eyes cold as stone. I'm Victor Castellano, he barked loudly enough for the entire lobby to turn. I don't wait for anyone. Do you know who I am? Emma didn't step back or falter. She remembered Clara's lessons, David's guidance, and the countless nights she had spent facing angry, intoxicated customers at her old restaurant. I fully understand that you're one of our most valued guests. Mr. Castellano, she said, her voice gentle but firm. And precisely because of that, I want to ensure your room is perfect before you enter. While you're waiting, may I invite you to enjoy a glass of 25-year Macallan in our private lounge, entirely complimentary as our apology for the inconvenience. Castellano studied her, his eyes still cold, but something shifted there, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even respect. He was silent for a moment, then gave a curt nod. 10 minutes, he said, turning toward the lounge. Not a second longer. Emma released a quiet breath as he disappeared around the corner. David smiled beside her. Nicely handled, he murmured. You were born for this job. Emma didn't answer, only smiled and returned to her work. But inside her chest, something warm spread. For the first time in a very long while, she felt like she truly belonged. That afternoon, around 4 o'clock, the atmosphere in the lobby shifted without warning. Emma was checking the evening reservation schedule when she felt it before she saw anything at all. The murmurs died down. Staff who had been moving about straightened instinctively. Guests seated in the lounge fell silent. She lifted her head and saw the door from the VIP corridor open. Nikolai Petrov stepped into the lobby, Roman Volkov at his side, followed by 2 bodyguards in black suits. He wore black as always, flawless and uncreased, moving with the calm authority of a man who owned the world beneath his feet. The late afternoon light streamed through the glass walls, sharpening the hard lines of his face and turning his gray eyes colder, brighter. Emma stood straight behind the reception desk, her expression composed even as her heart beat a little faster than usual. She didn't know whether he noticed her, didn't know whether the fact that this was her first official day mattered to a man like him. Perhaps to someone like Nikolai Petrov, she was only one employee among hundreds. Not worth remembering, not worth noticing. But as the group passed the desk, Nikolai stopped, abruptly, without warning, forcing Roman and the men behind him to halt as well. He turned and looked directly at Emma. Gray eyes met brown. Around them, the lobby seemed to stop breathing. Emma saw David stiffen beside her. She sensed other employees watching from a distance, curiosity and disbelief in their glances. She felt the weight of the moment and wondered what it meant. Nikolai said nothing. He simply looked at her for a long second, then gave a slight nod. A small gesture, almost insignificant, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Emma was paying attention, and she understood. It wasn't praise. It wasn't favor. It wasn't the nod of a boss acknowledging a subordinate. It was recognition. She stood here not because he allowed it. She stood here because she had earned it. He had seen that from the beginning, and now he was confirming it. Emma inclined her head in return, calm and dignified, as if nothing about this was unusual. Nikolai turned away and continued toward the exit, his entourage following. As Roman Volkov passed the desk, he glanced at Emma for a brief second, and in his normally unreadable eyes, she caught something that looked almost like respect. Then they were gone through the glass doors, and the lobby slowly resumed its rhythm. David exhaled beside her. "Do you know what that meant?" he asked quietly. Emma watched the glass doors close, watched the reflection of light settle back into place. She knew. She knew exactly what it meant. 1 week after her first official day, Emma was working at the reception desk when her personal phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and saw Dr. Helen Park's name. Her chest tightened. Dr. Park never called unless something was wrong. Emma asked David for a minute and stepped into the staff room to answer. Dr. Park's voice came through the line, calm but serious. The latest test results showed that Lily's condition was deteriorating faster than expected. The ventricular septal defect had grown larger, and Lily's heart was working far too hard. The surgery could not wait another year as originally planned. Lily would need surgery within 2 months, or the consequences would be severe. Emma leaned against the staff room wall, feeling as if the air had been pulled from her lungs. 2 months. Only 2 months. And the cost was still that enormous number, $200,000. Her new health insurance would cover part of it, maybe around $70,000 if she was lucky, but that still left more than $100,000 she had to find on her own. $100,000 in 2 months. She couldn't earn that amount, even if she sold her soul. Emma thanked Dr. Park and ended the call. She stood there alone in the quiet room, staring into nothing, her mind blank. She had tried so hard. She had done everything right. She had passed the training, secured the job, started rebuilding her life. And still, fate refused to let her go. She returned to the reception desk and forced herself to keep working as if nothing had happened. David saw something in her eyes. He didn't ask, only placed a hand on her shoulder for a brief second and quietly took over most of the afternoon's workload. Emma was grateful for that. She had no strength to talk, no strength to explain. She could only stand there, do what needed to be done, and try not to fall apart. That evening she got home later than usual. She picked Lily up from Margaret's apartment, thanked her for watching her, and walked her home. Lily chattered happily about her day at school, about the teacher praising her drawing, about a boy in her class giving her a candy. Emma listened, smiled at the right moments, nodded in the right places, but inside she was breaking. Lily didn't know. She didn't know that her small heart was growing weaker each day. She didn't know that her mother was desperately searching for a way to save her without knowing how. Emma fed Lily dinner, bathed her, read her a story, and tucked her into bed. She sat beside her, watching her daughter sleep, watching her peaceful face in the dim light, watching her small chest rise and fall with each breath. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. She had forgotten how to cry a long time ago. A knock sounded at the door. Emma startled and checked the clock. Nearly 10 at night. Who would come at this hour? She stood, walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and froze. Roman Volkov stood in the hallway, his face as unreadable as ever. Emma opened the door, her heart racing. "What is it?" she asked hoarsely. "Did something happen?" Roman didn't answer right away. He handed her a white envelope, thick and heavy. "From Mr. Petrov," he said, then turned and walked down the hallway without another word. Emma stood in the doorway watching his back disappear into the stairwell, then looked down at the envelope in her hand. She closed the door, locked it carefully, and went to the kitchen table. She sat down, placed the envelope in front of her, and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were 2 things, a check and a small handwritten note. Emma looked at the check, and the world seemed to stop turning. $200,000, the exact amount of Lily's surgery. Her hands trembled as she picked up the note. The slanted, sharp handwriting could only belong to Nikolai. "This is not a gift. This is an investment in a good mother. Pay it back when you can, or never. It doesn't matter." Emma read those lines again and again, once, twice, 10 times. She didn't understand. She didn't understand why a man like Nikolai Petrov would do this. He was a mafia boss, ruthless, cold. He shouldn't care about a single mother and a little girl with a failing heart. But he did. He had cared from the beginning, from the day he called her name in the lobby, from the day he gave her the training opportunity, from the day he told her about the sister he lost because there was no money for treatment. He saw himself in her. He saw the child he couldn't save in Lily, and he refused to let history repeat itself. Emma sat there, one hand holding the check, the other clutching the handwritten note, and for the first time in 3 years, she cried. Not quiet sobs, not restrained tears. She cried as if a door that had been sealed inside her for years had finally been forced open. Tears ran down her cheeks, onto her chin, onto the table, onto the $200,000 check. She cried from relief, from gratitude, because Lily would have surgery, because her daughter would have a chance to live. She cried because for the first time in her life, someone saw her drowning and reached out to pull her up instead of standing by and watching. She pressed the check to her chest and looked out the window of her small apartment, out at the New York night sky where city lights glittered like stars. Somewhere in this city, Nikolai Petrov was in his tower of power, as cold and ruthless as everyone believed. But Emma knew something no one else did. Beneath the ice, there was a heart that still knew how to ache. 6 months later, Emma stood in front of the mirror in the staff changing room at the Obsidian, adjusting the collar of her vest before starting her shift. She was now the club's lead receptionist, trusted by Clara to help train new staff, regarded by David as the natural successor to his position when he retired the following year. But the most important thing wasn't her job. Lily had undergone surgery successfully 4 months earlier. The operation lasted 6 hours, the longest 6 hours of Emma's life, as she sat in the hospital waiting room, hands clasped tightly together, praying to anyone who might be listening. When Dr. Helen Park emerged with a smile and said the surgery had been a success, Emma had collapsed into a chair and cried like she never had before. Now Lily was recovering better than anyone had expected. She could run without gasping for breath, climb stairs without stopping to rest, live like a normal 6-year-old for the first time in her life. Every morning when Emma woke to her daughter's laughter, she silently thanked the man who had given Lily this chance to live. Emma's mother was still weak, but she was far better cared for. Emma had hired a part-time helper to assist her mother while she was at work. Her mother no longer spent entire days alone, no longer waited in silence until her granddaughter came home from school. The apartment was still small, but it was warmer now, brighter, filled with more laughter. Emma had begun paying Nikolai back. Each month she set aside part of her salary and sent it through Roman Volkov, along with a small note listing the amount and a brief word of thanks. She knew it would take many years to repay the full sum on her current income, but she would repay it, dollar by dollar, because that was her dignity. Nikolai never mentioned the money. He never refused her payments either. He simply accepted them in silence, as if it were an unspoken agreement between them that required no discussion. Their relationship had changed in a way Emma didn't quite know how to name. Nikolai was still her employer, still the cold Mafia boss the entire city feared. But with Emma, he was different. Each time he passed the reception desk, he would pause for a second, give her a nod, sometimes ask a short question, "How's Lily?" Just those 3 words. But Emma knew what they meant. He cared. In his own way, distant and restrained, but still caring. Sometimes, when Emma stayed late to finish work, she would notice the light still on in his office on the 40th floor. Sometimes she wondered if he was lonely, a man with all the power and money in the world, yet no one he could truly trust. Sometimes she wondered whether their story ended here, or whether this was only the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. Emma didn't know the answers. She only knew that when she woke each morning, she no longer feared the future. She knew Lily would be all right, her mother would be cared for, and she had a job she loved. She had gone from an invisible night janitor mopping floors at 2 a.m. to a lead receptionist standing in the daylight. She had gone from a woman rejected for not fitting an image to a woman respected for her true ability. Emma looked into the mirror, looked at the woman looking back at her. She recognized her. For the first time in many years, she truly recognized herself. Credentials may open doors, but character and effort decide who deserves to walk through them. And sometimes, what a person needs isn't an opportunity. It's to be seen for who they truly are. Emma had been seen. And now, she was standing exactly where she belonged. This is the story of Emma Cole, a single mother who never gave up even when life pushed her into its darkest corners. This story reminds us that dignity cannot be taken unless we allow it, that quiet perseverance is worth more than 1,000 polished words, and that sometimes light comes from the places we least expect. If this story touched your heart, please like and share this video with the people you care about. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new emotional stories each day. We would love to hear your thoughts. What did this story make you think about? Have you ever experienced a moment in your life when you felt invisible, when you were judged by appearances rather than who you truly were? Share your story in the comments below. We truly look forward to reading every word from your heart. Thank you for spending your time with us today. We wish all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Always remember, no matter how difficult life becomes, never give up your dignity, because it is the most precious thing no one can ever take from you. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.